the Other Illinois podcast. My name is Russ Clark, and today I wanted to cover basically an extension of another episode where NBC5 had done a story on the Illinois partition movement. That's what I'm calling it. It's Illinois separation, or basically a movement to try and remove Cook County from the rest of Illinois. And there was another show that had done a feature on this that I was unaware of until just earlier. And this is from Up First from NPR. So obviously NPR has a large reach, but I wanted to find out how popular this podcast was. It turns out that this is the sixth most popular podcast in the United States. So we're talking about up there with Joe Rogan, Dayland NBC, and The Daily, which is from the New York Times. So regardless of what you think of those groups, I mean, obviously there's a lot of ears that are listening to it. I kind of wanted to do just exactly what I had done previously with the NBC piece. I kind of wanted to do a first-time reaction to it. I haven't listened to this at all, but I'm interested in hearing what other people think. And I'm going to let's go at 3:30 here. And I'll bring up the transcripts, and then that way, if people want to know what's actually being said, then they can hear. Then they can read for themselves. This might be a direct transcript. So
I'm Aisha Roscoe, and you're listening to the Sunday Story from Up First. 250 years ago this weekend, the Declaration of Independence was signed. It marked the beginning of American democracy. This year, NPR has been looking at how things have gone in the series America in Pursuit, stories from 250 years of life, liberty, and happiness. Americans tend to think about the Declaration of Independence as a founding document, the start of something, the text that brought the country together. But if you read it closely, you realize it's also a breakup text. A good portion of the Declaration of Independence is saying it's not you, it's me. This is just not going to work. We don't work well together, So in addition to being a document declaring freedom, the Declaration of Independence is also a document of secession. Today, we have a story about a group of people.
All right. So I kind of wanted to just touch on that briefly. So if you've never read the document, the Declaration of Independence, particularly because this happened 250 years ago this month, it actually lists a series of grievances, and those grievances are based on English common law and English rights that were issued back in the 1600s as part of the English Civil Wars that occurred with Charles I and the House of Stuart. So these are things that the king was supposed to support and uphold. The king decided to ignore what the House of Commons was doing, which was basically taxing the American colonies to pay off the war debt from the latest round of French and English wars. We know them here as the French and Indian Wars, but it was actually one of the very first multi-regional conflicts in the world. Besides the point, those were the grievances that they were talking about, and maybe we'll
group of people who see themselves as following in a fundamentally American tradition. A group of people who are claiming their right to declare their independence from a state they feel no longer represents them.
We, the people of the counties of New Illinois, solemnly publish and declare.
This is D.H. Merritt again.
And declare that these counties are and of right ought to be a free and independent state.
When we come back, a modern-day secessionist movement in the state of Illinois. Stay with us.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Carver.
I just want to get this straight. You've been talking to people who basically want to secede from their own state?
Yeah, I've been talking to people in the New Illinois movement. New Illinois, that's what they'd call this new state. And what they want is for all the counties in Illinois except Cook County, that's where Chicago is, to secede and become their own state, the 51st state.
So basically, they just want to ditch Chicago. Why?
Power. In Illinois politics, to be far from Chicago is to be far from power. Chicago's a big city.
And again, for the longest time, up until the most recent constitutional rewrite that occurred in 1970, that actually was not the case. The downstate counties actually had a lot more power. One, because there was a lot more population in downstate Illinois, but two, the Senate was broken up by county basically, and the Senate, in order for Chicago to get what it wanted, even though it controlled the House of Representatives, it still needed to deal with the other half of the state, especially by population-wise at least, to get what it wanted. And then also we had multi-member districts, so there was not a guaranteed veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate to, in the House at least, I should say. To get
third most populous in the country. The rest of Illinois, rural, far less populated. What that means is they don't have the same voting power as the Chicago area in the state legislature. Right now, because Chicago is a blue, liberal area, Democrats have a veto-proof supermajority in the state legislature, to the dismay of the people in rural downstate Illinois, who are mainly conservative.
Okay, so people from rural Illinois have created this group, New Illinois, with the goal of seceding from present-day Illinois and starting a new state. I mean, that's a pretty ambitious goal. Is there even a legal pathway to do this?
There is, and it's in the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution lays out, in Article 4, what has to happen in order to admit a new state to the Republic. There are two big things: the approval of Congress and the approval of the state's legislature.
So that's a pretty high bar. I mean, especially since the reason the new...
Again, this is nothing new. Because of the county of Kentucky in Virginia, the founders knew that this might actually be necessary to keep the government going.
The reason the New Illinois people started their movement is that they don't like how their state legislature makes decisions. And it seems unlikely that the current state legislature is going to let, a whole lot of the state just up and leave.
Right, exactly. And there's no shortage of irony that this is all happening in the land of Lincoln. But to be clear, those in the New Illinois movement, they don't want to start a new country like the Confederacy did in the Civil War. They see themselves as a very proud, very patriotic movement, taking inspiration from the founding fathers. They want to stay in America, just not in the same state as Chicago. And leaders of New Illinois say they no longer consent to be governed in this way, the state run by the big city. The only way they see to redress their grievances is to leave.
So basically, they're making the argument taxation without representation.
That's right. Aisha, back in October of 2020, G.H. Merritt, she's a chairman of New Illinois, she formalized her group's intentions.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by
On the steps of a courthouse in Western Illinois, she recited the Declaration of Independence,
providence.
the original one.
We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
And then she recited the new one.
We, the people of the counties of New Illinois,
The one that declares independence from Illinois.
solemnly publish and declare that these counties are, and of right ought to be, a free and independent state.
So tell me more about G.H. Merritt. So she's the one who got this started?
That's right. Yeah.
That's not necessarily the case. I believe Colin Clyburn started the Illinois separation movement prior to New Illinois being created. However, New Illinois is the one that actually is working on trying to form a government, whereas the Illinois separation group is basically going out and asking a question as to whether or not the state of Illinois should be
Got the
published.
idea to start a new state back in 2018. She lives in northern Illinois, up by a lake near the Wisconsin border. And she says she was frustrated by the state's high taxes. She felt like all that power in Chicago didn't really translate into many opportunities elsewhere. She and her husband considered moving away.
But I live in a house that my dad built. And one day it just kind of hit me like an epiphany that I don't want to sell my house. It means too much to me. And yet I had sense almost of being propelled out of the state because our state is so corrupt and the taxes are so high. And I just thought, why should I have to be the one to move?
Thus the tagline of the organization, leave Illinois without moving. And, the idea caught on. It turns out lots of people shared her frustrations. So, Aisha, if you'll indulge me a little revolutionary history.
Well, I think it's no better day than today or this time. I think everybody's thinking about it.
Totally. It's on everyone's mind. So, the original declaration, it included grievances against the king. And they put those grievances in the document itself, the breakup text. And New Illinois has a list of grievances too, but Merritt told me they had to break precedent there.
We didn't put grievances in our declaration because it would have been as long as an encyclopedia.
So the grievances, they publish them separately. They include tyrannically high taxes, unconstitutional gun laws, gerrymandering, debt, immigration enforcement, or lack thereof. The list goes on.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So there is a common thread between the Declaration of Independence for the United States and this declaration that New Illinois has written. So high taxation. So basically, you're being taxed to fund other things. So, for example, because the colonies here in the United States, here in what was the North America, did not have representation in the House of Commons. The House of Commons was leveraging taxes against them to pay for things that were one, the war debt, and the war debt was not only here in the American continent, but it was also going on in Europe at the time. And basically, the American colonies were like, "Hey, why are we paying for war debt that was incurred overseas?" Unconstitutional gun laws. So, for those of you who don't know, Illinois has some of the most strict gun laws here in the United States. So they feel that people should have the right to bear arms. Typically, they're talking about the FOID card, which is a firearm owner identification card. No other state has such things. Gerrymandering happens everywhere, but here in Illinois, it tends to be a little bit more egregious than others. We do have a high debt. We have a balanced budget amendment here in Illinois. But basically, what happens is that in order to balance the budget, the state borrows the money and claims that it's balanced for one day, and then it goes right back to being unbalanced. That's how they have passed budgets here in Illinois for years and years. Immigration enforcement, obviously, that one I don't agree with because Governor Rauner, who was a Republican, passed a bill that actually made Illinois a sanctuary state. So there are no enforcement agencies here in Illinois that are allowed to cooperate or coordinate efforts with ICE. So if they want to blame Chicago for that, well, that's not right. The whole state is a sanctuary state.
So there are a lot of policies and laws that they don't like, but they do not have the votes to stop.
Exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, critics of New Illinois point out that the folks downstate actually benefit from Chicago's tax dollars.
Again, he's referring back to the Paul Simon study that was done in 2018. So for those of you who don't know, the state of Illinois has actually lost another 100,000 people since that study was written in 2018. And the vast majority of that was actually in Cook County. So if you're saying that there's such an economic benefit to downstate Illinois from Chicago, how do you account for the 100,000 people that have already left the state, and 80,000 of those were directly moving from Cook County out of the state? It doesn't make any sense. A study from 2018, which was probably using information from 2013 or 2010, when there were probably almost 1 million people more in the state than what we have now, it doesn't make any sense. You kind of have to work off of more current data.
Chicago is a big economic engine for the state. There's this study from a few years ago showing just how Chicago helps rural counties. Some counties, people will get back something like $2 and change in state services for every dollar they pay in tax.
Again, that study said that was for Illinois south of I-64. That doesn't include the majority of the
Pay in
state.
tax. On the other hand, people in Cook County, they get like 90 cents back for every dollar taxed. So yeah, in that light, it's good to have Chicago in the state. Supporters of splitting up the state, they push back on that though. Given their own way, which I guess I mean given their own state, they say they'll create their own economic engines. They pledge to create a more business-friendly environment, fewer regulations, lower taxes. They want to revitalize the coal industry.
For those of you who don't know, and particularly people outside of Illinois, southern Illinois has a lot of coal. It's typically south of the I-72, I-74 corridor, but even here in Springfield actually sits on a very large coal deposit. It's not high quality coal, and given current environmental regulations, it'd be difficult to justify burning Illinois coal because coal in other areas from like Wyoming are much lower in sulfur, lower in other contaminants, and easier to operate. But I don't know if they can bring back the coal industry, but I think they would certainly entertain
Coal industry. Plus, they see all these economic liabilities brought about by Chicago Democrats. They point to the state's debt and underfunded pension system. They claim the state's being overtaxed. These are all things they want to get.
Okay. It's more than just a claim. Illinois property taxes are second highest in the nation. We compete with New Jersey every year for the highest property tax burden. We also have one of the highest gasoline taxes. We also have high sales taxes and so on. So it's not just a claim. It's mathematically proven that the taxes
Want to get away from.
So instead of receiving the Chicago tax dollars, they want to generate the revenue themselves by like lowering taxes, bringing in new companies and things of that nature. They believe, like many conservatives, that will be better for them.
That's right. That's the game plan.
So, I mean, it sounds like they have these plans and they have this vision, but it seems like a bit performative because of that paradox that we talked about. They're going to read the Declaration of Independence on the courthouse. It's dramatic, but what's it doing?
Totally. And you aren't alone in thinking it performative. I reached out to Governor J.B. Pritzker for comment about New Illinois. He called it a stunt. Except the thing is, after all my reporting, it doesn't seem like a stunt to me. New Illinois is serious and they're organized.
How much support is there in the actual counties?
Okay, so to understand that, you've got to meet Lorette Newland.
I'm probably the most persistent person in Illinois separation, so I guess that kind of makes me the leader.
So Newland is very much a New Illinois secessionist, but her focus is on the mechanics of making it happen. So she has her own group that works in tandem with New Illinois. It's called the Illinois Separation Referendum.
So the separation referendum. So they want voters to weigh in on this question of leaving. Have voters weighed in?
Yes. Part of the reason that New Illinois has had so much traction is in part because they've actually been able to get the question of secession onto the ballot. Like, this is a thing that people are voting on election day.
So how does that work?
So it's an advisory question. It's non-binding, but it's been on the ballot in 33 counties so far. That's a third of the counties in the state. And the response has been resounding in favor of the idea. Newland showed me a map of the referendum results so far. Let's look at that map.
Okay.
So talk to me about this map. It is striking. I mean, you look at basically the southern half of the state, pretty well colored in there.
We can get.
All right, let me see if I can bring that up here for you guys. So this is all of as of 24. Now there are another 7 counties that will vote on this separation referendum this year. These are the percentages. As you can see, there's over the 33 counties, there were 74% of them voted yes. So this is not only passing, this is passing by quite a bit. So this is Gallatin, Saline, and then Henderson. So this is she's actually going to be filling in this little block here to get it on the ballot. Now, the growth of Chicago actually did not occur until after 1840. Now, that's because they built a canal, basically taking water from the Chicago River and putting it into the Illinois River. And that's what allowed the floodplain that Chicago sits on today to actually drain away from Lake Michigan. Before that, it was actually a pretty swampy area and not something that you could actually build large skyscrapers on, things like that. So, but once that was put into place, then Chicago started to grow into the city that it is today. And that couldn't have happened without downstate votes like from Abraham Lincoln. I think he actually proposed one and won a bill. So,
Western Illinois, to interview him.
I want to save Illinois, and it's worth saving.
Mulch and I talked at the Hancock County Courthouse, where Mulch holds monthly meetings for his new Illinois committee.
So inside the courthouse, so they're working on building a new state inside a government building for the old state.
They're
let's see. I don't think this transcript is right.
meetings in a courthouse where a portrait of Abraham Lincoln hangs in the lobby, which, again, historical irony abounds. While the ballot referendum demonstrates the movement,
there's no historical irony here. Abraham Lincoln spent very little time in the city of Chicago. And when they talk about the Illinois Republican Convention or the National Convention in 1860, Lincoln wasn't there. So there's no irony here. Abraham Lincoln was a Kentuckian, an Indianan, and an Illinoisan, and basically operated here in central Illinois, lived here in Springfield, but had very little to do with Chicago. He had a lot to do with Chicago as his clients were railroad people and operated in Chicago and might have lived in Chicago, but he himself spent very little time up there.
Support among voters, I was also starting to see the traction they have higher up. Larry Mulch is an elected official. He's a township supervisor. And the former sheriff of Hancock County is in the group. And that's how they were able to use the courthouse in the first place. And Mulch explained to me that's why they're organizing on this grassroots, county by county basis.
That's the purpose, is to go out and find a core group within that county that is willing to do whatever's necessary.
You build a base of support among your neighbors, your township supervisors, your sheriff. Then you start to lobby the county board, the state senators. And they're speaking from a place that is so resonant to so many of their neighbors. Lots of people I've spoken with talk about downstate Illinois as fundamentally different from Chicago. To a person, everyone I spoke with referenced the history of downstate Illinois, settled in the 19th century, largely by Kentucky and Tennessee farmers. While early on, Chicago had more of a connection to shipping, the Great Lakes, and then, of course, became this big metropolis. As they see it, the state is cleaved together, two places with two pasts, two presents, two ways of life.
We are a different people, and we've got a different mindset.
And so when you feel so connected to a place, but you don't see your priorities, your values, your worldview reflected in how that place is run, there's a distress, but also a motivation.
That sense of powerlessness is always the driving force.
So Aisha, I talked to an expert on secession movements, Dr. Kenneth Owen. He's a history professor at the University of Illinois, Springfield. He's been following New Illinois for years.
I think there is something about the idea of secession that appeals to the American mindset. I think it's part of the American founding myth. Having our own government is a way that they can reclaim some of that power that they feel they don't have.
So Owen says there are two hallmarks of these movements. One, a sense of cultural identity distinct from the place you're seceding from. And two, clear political stakes, a sense of what can be gained by leaving. Owen sees both at work in New Illinois.
They are building the sort of political infrastructure that you would expect to need. I just think that there are much greater structural impediments ahead of them.
And those impediments, I imagine, are the constitutional requirements for starting a new state.
That's right. That's right.
So given all of that, like, what are the chances of this actually happening? Has something like this ever happened before in the US?
So New Illinois likes to point to West Virginia as precedent, but Kenneth Owen doesn't really think that applies. West Virginia seceded from Virginia because Virginia had seceded from the United States. The context of the Civil War is so distinct, it just wouldn't set a precedent.
Okay. That's kind of a misnomer too, because West Virginia was a area of minimal to none of a slave owning area of Virginia. They just didn't have plantations. This is a mountainous rural area that was kind of seen as a backwater by Richmond. So I don't think that that's true.
People also point to Maine leaving Massachusetts. That's part of the Missouri Compromise of 1820, this agreement to let one slave-holding state, Missouri, into the Union along with one free state, Maine, to maintain this precarious balance in the lead up to the Civil War. So again, Owen says, the context is just totally distinct.
So there is, in theory, a constitutional mechanism. It has never been used to create a new state on this scale.
I completely disagree. The county of Kentucky is almost exactly what is going on here. And Maine, too. Maine was not just, oh, well, we need another state. There was actually a free Maine movement inside of Maine for at least 20 years after 1800. It really kicked up after the War of 1812 because Maine was actually kind of getting ravaged by the British Navy during that war. So no, I disagree.
So you're saying there's a chance?
This is what's interesting about secession, right? They all sound crazy right up until the time that they happened.
Okay, it's a long shot. And even though some people are dismissing it as a stunt, you've been digging in, and the people who are organizing this are serious and they're taking serious steps. So something is happening here, but it seems like it's about to run straight into a wall. That is the state legislature. So what happens if this doesn't work?
So I asked Kenneth Owen about this. He says there's a best case scenario in which the tension can actually prove productive for the state.
It's maybe about reopening the social contract. So in a lot of the cases that I've studied, people are really unhappy about a particular issue. Regular political channels haven't quite worked. And then when they threaten secession, it gets lots of attention and it starts a conversation that moves things together.
So, I mean, the threat of secession could be looked at as kind of like a check engine light.
Exactly. And as a blinking light, it's already working. Take LaShawn Ford. He's a Democrat from Chicago in the state legislature who takes the concerns of New Illinois seriously.
Rural Illinois and urban Illinois, we need to figure out how we can find common ground.
And Ford actually spoke at a New Illinois conference back in 2023. He's described by the group as the only Democrat in the legislature willing to have the conversation about splitting the state. While that's an overstatement, he does see himself as someone they can talk to, someone who can dialogue.
But what is his stance on the issue?
Oh, he's against it and said so at the New Illinois conference. He thinks those $2 extra of funding that the rural counties are getting from Chicago provide crucial services, infrastructure. He thinks leaving would be cutting off your nose to spite your face. And he puts the issue in more populist terms.
It's not really North and South that's at war. It's the have and have nots.
Ford says the issues facing working people, food deserts, healthcare, they're the same across Illinois. But his solution, a progressive tax on the wealthy, it's a non-starter for conservatives.
All right. So this goes back to what they called the fair tax. So Illinois has a constitutional flat income tax. And LaShawn Ford was one of the people in the House that wanted to replace it with a progressive income tax with different brackets and things like that, like what you might see in other states. It was voted down And the only counties that actually voted for this fair tax was Cook County. They were the only ones. It won their 70-30, but the problem is that the rest of the state voted it down. So to me, that's a non-starter. It was pretty much everybody outside of Cook County that wanted to keep a flat tax, a flat income tax. So if you want to talk about an indication of how different the culture is between Cook County and the rest of the state, there's a clear example of why.
Conservatives downstate who are allergic to taxation. So the impasse holds.
Well, the policy debate here, taxes, regulation, guns, it is extremely familiar because we hear it over and over again, and it just seems intractable. But I also have to ask, Connor, this rural, mostly white group is complaining about the big city. To what extent is this about race?
Okay, here we go with NPR. NPR wants to claim that all the black people live in Cook County. That's not true. There's plenty of black people that live here in Sangamon County. There's plenty of black people that live in these southern counties. Madison County is actually, I think, probably 20% black. If I were to take a look at it, as a matter of fact, let's just check that right now here. So just bring up Madison County, which is the biggest county that's actually voted to separate from Cook County. You've got 7% black people there. So again, it's not huge, but it's. But we are talking about that there are black people that live in other areas of Illinois besides Cook. So I don't understand why NPR wants to make this about race, other than they're on the left.
Punching bag, and people start saying, see, all of our tax dollars are being wasted in Chicago.
So he doesn't see it as.
I'm going to argue with him on that. So anyone who knows anything about the Chicago Public School District, they've had falling enrollment for the past 4 years, but their funding has continued to increase. And as a matter of fact, with the new education funding equation that came out of the legislature in this decade, Chicago Public Schools gets $200 million right off the top before anyone else in the state sees another dollar. So again, there is waste and abuse in Chicago, and it seems like there's more and more waste. So it's mathematically provable that Chicago does waste money.
The factor, but a potential aggravating factor. Does Ford see race shaping the issue in other ways?
He does.
Me being a black man, even though this country's been good to me, it still could be frustrating being in a minority. And that's the way they feel. They know what it feels like to be in a minority and not be able to have the sway that they would like.
Do you have any advice, man, given that?
Yeah, I think that my advice to them is let's work together. Let's make Illinois stronger.
But how does that stronger together, we're one Illinois message play with the new Illinois movement?
About as well as you'd expect. And I don't think many people in the state are under any illusions about unity. An Illinois historian has compared the state to a set of conjoined twins. The diagnosis from a longtime journalist here was schizophrenia.
Given that
I'd agree more with schizophrenia than conjoined twins.
odds are against secession actually passing legislatively, what other outcomes might there be?
In one scenario, the state just carries this tension. In another scenario, the tension continues to ratchet up. Here's how Kenneth Owen sees it.
Do the circumstances exist for political violence to break out in the United States at the moment? Yes. Is it likely? I'm not sure that political violence is ever likely or unlikely when those circumstances exist. Most of the time that a rebellion breaks out, it's because there's a spark that lit the fire.
I'm sorry, but this is kind of throwing me because he obviously has a British accent. Even though he lives here in Springfield, we don't talk that way. So person who was raised in England or the British to talk about rebellion here in the States is a little sacrosanct to me.
The question is, how many sparks are there around?
Well, clearly it sounds like you've been seeing a whole lot of sparks.
Yeah. So Aisha, let me take you one last place, over to Highland, Illinois. This St. Patrick's Day, I went to meet Virgil Strader. Strader is in New Illinois' transitional legislature.
Okay, I'm going to apologize to everybody now, and actually I want to make this be roll.
Helping to build the political infrastructure for the state, drafting a constitution, writing laws. In his day job, he's an auctioneer. He was hosting a benefit auction for the local quarterback club.
Jim, I'll come sit here next to you if that's all right.
So over a plate of corned beef and cabbage, I chatted with the people at my table.
That's right, yeah.
Afterward, I told Virgil about our conversation. So I told him a little bit about the story that I was working on. They hadn't heard of New Illinois. And yet, everyone at the table, they're talking about the gas tax. They're talking about the tax that finances the trains in Chicago.
Hold on. Now, he's not talking about the full story here. So for those people who don't know in Illinois, this gas tax that we have is one of the highest nationally. I think it's 48 or 49 cents per gallon of gas. That was to go to roads. And what happened in this past legislative session is that they took money out of that road fund and created a new metropolitan mass transit district in the Chicago and surrounding counties, and dumped 90% of the money into that fund, and then left the rest of the state, let's say Peoria, Champaign, Bloomington, Sangamon County, even Madison County, they got 10%. So does that actually seem fair? The population of the state is not served 90% by this new regional transportation district versus 10 the rest of the state. It wound up being, population-wise, it wound up being more like 45, 55. But, when you're talking about things like that, obviously it feels like everybody's putting into this gas tax fund is statewide, but again, we're dumping additional money into the Chicagoland area at the expense of rural voters who may not have an option other than to drive everywhere.
In Chicago, it is a thing that people are kind of fluent in, even if they're not necessarily involved.
And before that bill, the train systems in the Chicagoland area did not receive any of this money.
Involved in the movement.
Well, how can you not be fluent in it if you're subject to it? We have taxation without representation.
Yeah, taxation without representation. They're aligning themselves with the American Revolution.
Exactly.
There's no way to fix it politically. There comes a time of reckoning, and we're getting very close.
I wonder for you, is there a point where you'd think like this isn't working? Or
if it don't work, grab your gun.
Okay. No, violence is never the answer, because guess what? They'll just show up and take all your stuff anyways. That's not a good plan.
Grab your gun.
Strader says if they neither get the approval of the state nor the federal legislatures, then that could potentially trigger violence.
If we don't get the approval of the Illinois legislators, then I would say that there would be a better than 50% chance that we would have a battle.
Now, a bill to split the state was introduced during the most recent legislative session in Illinois, but it didn't make it out of committee. The legislator who introduced that bill, Brad Halbrook, he told me the plan is to introduce the bill again in the next session. When I asked him about the possibility of violence, he pointed to the Declaration of Independence. The Founding Fathers weren't worried about the law, he said. They were worried about the political will to do something different. That's where we're at in Illinois, he said. The question for Halbrook was, What are you prepared to do?
Well, and when he says, "What are you prepared to do?" Does that essentially mean
I'm sorry, but we gave LaShawn Ford, some time and some video and some audio here, not video. But you couldn't do the same thing for Representative for Brad Holbrook. Again, kind of showing your bias here.
like, are you willing to take up arms?
That's the question on Virgil Strader's mind. He tells me there's no militia associated with New Illinois, but he does know people with heavy arsenals who would be willing to join a secessionist fight.
We may surround the Capitol building in Springfield. I wouldn't rule that out. There's been no talk of doing that, but I wouldn't rule it out.
No.
Strader.
This is crazy. I don't know if you caught this gentleman on a bad day or not. Nobody that I've ever met in either of the petition group or New Illinois is talking like this. So that's kind of crazy.
Strader imagines, fantasizes maybe, a scenario in which an armed group would surround the Capitol and demand to form a new state, forcing the split without having to fire a shot. You see only two options on the table: separating or civil war. Could it, I'm just, could it really come to that?
I hope not, but it has in the past. It's just how much bullshit you're going to put up with, and we've had enough.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. It is. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. War is not something to brag about. War is not something to be proud of. It's man's inhumanity to man. But by the same token, if you push hard enough and long enough, at some point in time, it's like whipping the dog in the corner. For long, he's going to come out and he's going to get you.
The chairman of New Illinois, G.H. Merritt, she disavowed any talk of war. She said leaving Chicago was more like leaving a bad marriage to avoid killing your partner. And Lorette Newland of Illinois Separation, she stressed that she was putting the advisory question on the ballot instead of waging war, as if the referendum acted almost as a pressure release valve for this urban-rural tension in the state. This year, Newland has persuaded 8 more county boards to include the separation referendum on the ballot in the upcoming midterm elections. She continues to lobby in more counties. But in doing so, does she risk spreading sparks to more of the state? I pushed her on it. You have got your finger on the pulse of something here. And I'm wondering, if it doesn't work, what happens to that energy?
That's not something I spend any time thinking about.
Why not?
I tell you, I'm a farm girl. You plant anyway. You don't know what storms are going to come. You don't know what the temperature is going to be. You don't know what the price is going to be. You plant the seed anyway.
Plant the seed anyway. I guess the question is, what's going to grow?
Totally.
Thank you, Connor, for bringing us all of this great reporting.
Thanks, Aisha. Good to be with you.
That was Connor.
All right. So I don't know how much original reporting was actually in this story, because they actually talked to the majority of the people that were in the Chicago NBC piece. So I don't know if they were going out together or if the Chicago piece had heard about the NPR piece, and so they were doing a video story. It seemed like the time frames were a little different. They talked about how they were doing their interviews around St. Patrick's Day, and I know that the Chicago 5 piece was doing their interviews probably in April or May. But kind of interesting, and I really disagree with any sort of violence on this issue. But I will say that there is another outlet for these frustrations to be voiced, and that is the fact that the Illinois state constitution is up for a revote in 2028, or I guess I should say an affirmation vote. So Illinois voters in 2028 will actually be asked a question, and it'll be the first question on the ballot. Should the Illinois state constitution be kept in force? Okay. And the way that will pass is if 60% of the people say yes, then it automatically goes back into force. If 60% of the people say no, then you have a state constitution convention, just like that was held back in 1970. So maybe that's the next answer. But anyways, I want to thank everybody for listening in. I hate that this was kind of retreading some of the same information that was shared in the Chicago 5 piece, but on the other hand, it was good to hear NPR is still doing NPR type things and ramping up race and violence, which I don't think has played into this question at all. I have yet to see any of that in my part of the world here in Sangamon County and in Springfield, the capital. So hopefully nobody's showing up and we've got tanks rolling down the street. I certainly is not something that I would want. So thanks. This is the New Illinois Podcast. If you like what you heard, please share and subscribe to us. It really helps with the algorithms and get the word out. So